out, and now we're going to bring on someone who was, so Aaron was in the press room writing about the race, tweeting about the race. Now we're going to bring somebody on who was actually in the booth calling the race. This is the legendary Paul Swangard. Hey, Paul.
Good afternoon.
How are you doing?
I'm good. Little sunny day in Tracktown. So different day than what we saw back in. Oh yes.
Yes.
Looks
very different.
Looks like Oregon weather there.
That's right. Before we get into this, how's Eugene doing? How are they handling the postponement of the trials and the games? And what's the vibe in Eugene?
Yeah, I mean, like everyone, I mean, we're disappointed, but in a different way. There was so much excitement, coming for the events not only this year but also into next year with the World Championships. And as you drive by Hayward Field coming up into its 2.0 version, I mean, we're really excited and waiting for events to start happening there, and it's going to be, fingers crossed we'll get back on that track soon. But in fact, I'll see if through the magic of my own backgrounding, let's see if I can, there's a picture floating around from late last week. They finally took the tarp off the tent.
Oh, wow.
So there's a look inside. They haven't put the lines on it yet, but a new bind-in surface and 12,800 permanent seats. And if you can actually look down there, I mean, the front row will actually be on the surface of the track. So pretty cool. Pretty much a theater in the clouds for track and field.
Oh, that's unbelievable. That's really, really cool. What will your role be at the trials? Will you be on the broadcast, or will you be in the announcer's booth over this loudspeaker? Yeah,
big transition for me. I'm actually on the NBC side all the way through the Olympics in Tokyo when we hopefully have them. So stepping out of my in-state role, it's been fun. That's kind of where my root. I was a TV guy coming out of college, and the track and field announcing in stadium was just sort of something I did while I didn't work in that field anymore. So nice to be back involved. And, as you guys are watching, I mean, it's a different role, but when you have an opportunity to sit on the finish line and call a epic finish, what we saw in 2018, it's pretty special.
Did your voice lead you into your profession, or was this great voice just a lucky coincidence because you wanted to do this anyway?
Yeah, I mean, my mother likes to share a story of me interviewing myself in the stainless steel toaster when I was growing up, and that maybe I was always destined for doing this type of thing. I was very fortunate here in Eugene, growing up at South Eugene High School. I could actually get all my English credits for high school by taking radio broadcasting. So from a very early age, I was giving up the classics in the book form to spin classic jazz records, which was the format that South Eugene had to run on the high school radio station. And I mean, it just kind of lucked into it. And I was very fortunate that opened up at Hayward to start doing the in-stadium stuff. Wendy Ray, who, if you watch both the pre-movies, actually was cast as himself as the PA announcer. He retired and kind of just stepped into that, and just got a chance to learn from a lot of really great other in-stadium guys. Gary Hill, who's the longtime editor at Track and Field News, done multiple Olympic games, and just a bunch of other guys that I've gotten to work with. Mike Jay, obviously out at Drake and Des Moines, is one of the great guys out there. So the voice has kind of become my new normal.
But on this day, you're in the booth. You're on the broadcast with Tim Hutchings and Craig Masback.
Mm-hmm.
But we watched the beginning, and you were outside. Were you guys outside the whole time?
We were not. We
Okay.
we did have a little makeshift studio set up that we were put into for the bulk of the race. But yeah, I mean, the production challenges that day, and I think one of the things that I wanted to make sure that we chatted about here is that I think people maybe don't understand how complex a production like a marathon is. So in a typical race, when they start, we'll have small planes flying up above the start so that pictures can be beamed to a device hooked onto the bottom of the plane that will relay the signal back to where the production's being done. And on that day, all the planes and the helicopters were grounded. So we were really limited in our ability to kind of tell the story of the early part of the race because we simply just didn't have any pictures, or when we did, it was, very low quality. So we were able to do our pre-race and our post-game show there from the finish line, but otherwise we were able to be inside, and I think we got out of that pretty lucky, given what these athletes experienced for the better part of 2.5 hours.
Yeah, so let's do some inside baseball. So essentially what we see here on the screen, is that what you guys are seeing? Are you at the mercy of the person in the truck pushing the buttons on what race you're bouncing back and forth between?
It depends on the broadcast. In this case, there are 3 different broadcasts going on at this time. We've got what's called the world feed, which is being distributed around the globe, usually without commentary, or they'll have English commentary if you want to purchase the feed with that. You also have the WBZ local Boston affiliate that's doing their show, and then our show with NBC. And yeah, we're pulling in all sorts of camera angles. We have a big monitor bay in front of us, where if we see something that we like to talk about, we can call for that camera. But we also have a producer sitting back. In this case, he was sitting in NBC Sports headquarters in Stamford, Connecticut, and he's kind of weaving the story together. But we're trying to also pay attention to see if something pops up that we want to talk about as well.
Is that the biggest challenge, or what is the biggest challenge about announcing a World Marathon Major from the booth like that? Because there's a lot of armchair quarterbacks that want to talk about, you missed the move, you went to commercial at the wrong time, you didn't split screen enough. What's the biggest challenge for you guys?
Well, the biggest challenge is we're rarely in control of all the pictures, and every World Marathon Major seems to have its own philosophy, which I actually think is a negative. I think if we were doing a better job, we would standardize some of those broadcast elements. For example, the Tokyo Marathon tends to have much more focus on domestic runners. Mm-hmm. But we're a world feed. We're not necessarily as interested in those Japanese runners, but their broadcasts tend to showcase those, maybe at the expense of the female elites or the wheelchair racers. Berlin tends to not show the wheelchair racers at all, and sometimes we've got great American stories to tell when Tatiana and Susanna and some of the other major road racers are there. So I think I see that criticism too. And, if it was a perfect world and we had control of all the pictures, we would definitely do things different. I do think that one of the things that we're trying to do by having NBC, invest in at least American announcers is that we can tell those stories of American racers, even when we don't have the pictures to support it. And that's, I guess, sometimes the best we can offer. But we're definitely at the mercy of some of these directors and cameras that we're only one of in some cases 80 countries that are carrying this particular race, and we're not necessarily going to get all of our requests answered because everyone else has a request too.
This is another inside baseball question. There seems to be about maybe half dozen, 6 to 8 of you guys that seem to vie for these particular positions in the booth on any one of these marquee days. Who's making those decisions on what particular announcers are going to cover, whatever particular race it might be?
Yeah, production coordinators across the various events, those who have the rights. So, NBC obviously making a lot of those calls as well. Sometimes it has to depend on which outlet it will be on. So if it's going to go on Olympic Channel versus NBCSN versus NBC network, sometimes why you see maybe somebody who hasn't done, a lot of track and field, Tom Hammonds would come to mind, where you would only see him at some of the bigger events like the Olympics and some of the marquee events. It's really, again, a decision by NBC to bring in some of their, top tier people, not necessarily, the best experts on the sport, but, sometimes when you're playing to a mainstream audience, those familiar faces help draw an audience, which I think is a good thing for our sport. More eyeballs watching, the more they'll understand how great a sport this really is.
Sure. One of the things Scott and I prepped beforehand was this question, and I've heard announcers in other sports talk about it. Let's say it's Jim Nantz with the Masters, preparing for a possible Tiger Woods win. Do you prepare that winning line beforehand or not? So on a race like this, where even going in, there was a very good possibility that an American woman could win the race. Honestly, American man as well. There was, Galen had a great chance. And so, or people thought he did. So is that something you're thinking about beforehand, or is that formulating itself in your mind as Des takes the lead late? How rehearsed is that finish line call?
I think it depends on the broadcaster. In my case, I try not to pre-plan that. I think you just want to react to the moment. And, as I've gone back and had a chance to watch at least the last little stretch of this race, in some cases, I really didn't know what to say. I mean, we were just kind of stunned by the moment and the circumstance and the environment. And I think I tried to, make some feeble attempt to make light of the fact that, the rain was still coming down, but the drought was over. I think that was my,
yes.
My best attempt at a cliche. And, you have somebody in your ear who's saying, wax poetic or lay out, which is a real common thing. And that in particular with Des' finish, you'll note that, kind of lead her across Exeter, right by the hotel. And then I'm just trying to let the pictures tell the story. And that to me is how I would rather see. I'm not a big fan of talking over video just for the fact of, because I'm on, I'm supposed to say something. I found a lot of international commentary tends to be like you're getting paid by the word. That moment with Des, we didn't need to say anything. I think she crossed the line. I said, Des Linden wins Boston, and just let it out. And then, as I often rib him, and I know you're going to have him on a little bit later, better than any crying Jordan meme we could have ever done. Josh Cox crying us into the break has got to be, that's they should just give an Emmy for, finish line reactions.
We'll let him discuss that for sure later.
Okay. Quick question.
Yes, Scott, go for it.
So for a race like Boston, where there's some relatively unknown people way up front, was that a challenge? How deep, I guess, does your research go ahead of time? When, for example, like when Sarah Sellers gets second, is that covered, or is it tough to know all that?
Yeah, I mean, I felt bad for Sarah because she was just, she wasn't on our radar going into that race. And some broadcasts, we get a lot of research support. In other broadcasts, almost reminiscent of how I have to kind of approach in-stadium announcing, I'm kind of doing it all on my own. And in the moment, I think it just got so crazy after Des crossed the finish line. I think we just kind of lost, trying to follow the race. But yeah, I mean, I think we actually did get her on the London broadcast the next week and did a segment with her, kind of like what we're doing now, and got a chance to tell her story a little bit better. And that's the one thing and Tim Hutchings and some of the other guys that I work with all the time. I mean, there's been, and Kerry Tolson might be able to talk about it a little bit later. I mean, you get one of these New York Roadrunner half marathon broadcasts where all of a sudden one of the Ethiopian locals is, suddenly leading the race for, 2-3 miles, and you just don't have you have no research on them because they were not part of the elite field. And those are ones you try to forget. And I guess the lesson is you got to go deep and have at least something to say about everybody.
Give us your favorite call ever.
Oh, favorite call ever. In stadium, I called Bolt's last race at 200 meters. That was pretty cool, just to have kind of the crowd at your disposal and kind of, just that's the cool thing about in-stadium announcing is you kind of get that immediate, feedback from the crowd. I mean, Des was pretty special. I mean, I think, I didn't know Des really well, but I think I, like a lot of other people, just now totally appreciate that race and that win should absolutely define her career, because that's the race she should have won under those conditions. And I think the blue collar, and I even think I mentioned it on the broadcast. So, it's probably an easy answer on a day like today. And, it was cool. So, I mean, that stands out on my mind, and I just hope there's more of that to come, and hope we're all out, shaking hands on the side of a track, getting ready for good racing. And I mean, I think the only sad news today is we definitely have to do a toast to Coogan's, as the word has come down that
oh no,
Coogan's is now officially closed.
Oh,
sad.
That is sad.
Yeah.
That is sad.
So anyone who never got a chance to go there, that was the quintessential track and field bar, if there ever was one in the United States. So.
Yeah, there's going to be some bad, but there's going to be some good come out of this. We're going to be back, hopefully sooner than later, hopefully September in Boston. We'll keep our fingers crossed, and we appreciate you coming on, Paul. We can't wait to hear your voice at a race soon.
Yeah, thanks, guys.
All right,
thanks for doing this.
No
All right,
problem.
see you.